Let's get on with today's topic, overcoming the fetish of complexity. To start off, I'd like to tell you a little story about this man, Stephen Hawking. In case you don't know, Stephen Hawking was a physicist, and he spent his entire career solving very difficult, very complex problems relating to the origin of the universe, Big Bang, the nature of time, how the universe will end, and things like this. It's very, very difficult, complex stuff. Here's an example. Here's a page from his PhD thesis relating to the nature of expanding universes. Now, I'm pretty sure that nobody in this room understands all of this stuff, or if you do, you probably studied for many years. For anybody to understand anything on this page, you'd have to study for a long time. Nevertheless, because Hawking was dealing with such important fundamental questions about existence and the universe, he felt that he should get his ideas across to a bigger audience, to a more general audience. And that's why he wrote this book, A Brief History of Time. Now, to write the book, Hawking had to translate the mathematical spaghetti that he worked with every day into another form, into a form that regular people could understand. So rather than using mathematical equations, he would use everyday metaphors, simple diagrams, and powerful storytelling to get his ideas across. In fact, talking of spaghetti, one of the ideas in the book relates to what would happen if you were to fall into a black hole. And he says the force of gravity inside a black hole is so strong that you'd be stretched out in a process that he rather amusingly calls spaghettification. Spoiler alert, it doesn't end well. Now, actually, when Hawking was working on the draft of his book, his editor warned him that every single mathematical equation that he included in the book would halve its sales. So he really was under pressure to keep things simple and keep things very unmathematical. In the end, the only mathematical equation that he did include was Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared. And he only included it because he felt it was too important to leave out. And he says at the beginning of the book, I hope this will not scare off half of my potential readers. Now, I think it's safe to say that Hawking succeeded in his goal of reaching a bigger audience. Since A Brief History of Time was published, it has sold more than 25 million copies, and it's been translated into more than 40 languages. So he's definitely reached a bigger audience than his mathematical equations would have. Now, speaking of reaching a bigger audience, that's kind of why we're all here today. So let me segue now from Hawking and Einstein to Norman. Norman said on LinkedIn this week that crypto has a growth problem, and it does. Now, there are many reasons for this, and I'm sure that most of you would understand those reasons a lot better than I do. I'm not a crypto specialist. I'm not a Web3 specialist. My thing is all about communication. But I have my own ideas about why crypto and Web3 generally struggles to reach the audience that it really deserves. So I'm going to dive into that a little bit in the next slide. What I want to do is I want to draw a parallel between some ideas in crypto or Web3 and ideas from Hawking, ideas from theoretical physics. So on the left-hand side here, we have some ideas from Web3. And on the right-hand side here, we have Hawking's equations. Now, obviously, it takes more work to understand this stuff than it would to understand most of these things over on the left-hand side. I'm not going to deny that, okay? Nevertheless, for the average person, for the regular person on the street, an average Jane, an average Joe, the net result is the same. They don't understand it, and so they don't engage with it. So all of these things over here, they may as well be mathematical equations for the average person, okay? Not for you, but for the average person, for people who are not Web3 experts, okay? So in general, if you work in a technical field, whether it's Web3 or cybersecurity or theoretical physics, if you want to reach a bit bigger audience, if you want to reach a more general audience, you have to somehow translate your ideas into a format that's more easy to understand. So Hawking did this, as I said, by using everyday metaphors like spaghetti, using simple diagrams, using powerful storytelling. So there's a process of translation that needs to happen. But that's a kind of obvious point, right? I want to dig a little bit further and look at the role that complexity plays in communication. And it's a bit of a problem. It's a bit of a problem. It's a bit of a problem because complexity is very closely related with important drivers of innovation. So for anything technical to have any value, it has to have some kind of complexity, okay? Let me give you a couple of examples. Bitcoin mining, it only works through the solving of very complex mathematical problems, okay? It depends on complexity. Value derives from complexity, okay? To give you a more concrete everyday example, my watch is a very complex technical product. It has hundreds of components, some of them physical, some of them digital. And the process of bringing all of those components together into a user experience that I value is a complex process, okay? Next thing, if we want to build a product or a service that is difficult to replicate, which makes it unique, competitive, and investable, it has to be complex in some way. Otherwise, somebody would just come along and copy it. Nerding out is something that most of us like to do. We don't nerd out on simple things, and that's a good thing. The world needs people to nerd out. The world needs people, the world needs nerds to solve the sorts of problems that, well, most other people don't want to solve. Progress in technology and science depends on the mastering of different forms of complexity. Not only that, but when we master complexity, it makes us feel clever. There's an ego factor at play here as well, okay? Now, the problem is that although complexity is closely related to key drivers of innovation, it's also related to brakes on growth. When ideas are complex, they're more difficult to understand. They gain less adoption than they otherwise would. The same with complexity of communication. The same with complexity of onboarding. Someone has to sign up some complicated thing and buy tokens and whatnot. Creates friction, makes things difficult. Complexity in general is a brake on growth for the average person, okay? So we have to keep in mind that although complexity is closely related with all of these important things over here, it also makes it more difficult for the average person to understand and adopt the important stuff that is being developed through nerding out on complex ideas, complex problems, complex technologies. So this brings me to my mantra. Don't fetishize complexity. What does this mean? What does this mean? Don't fetishize complexity. What it means is, don't be so in love with the things that you love to nerd out on that you forget that most people don't care about them. Love can make you blind. Love can make you blind. There's a difference between the complexity that we fall in love with as technical people and the value that users derive from a technical product or service, right? I love my watch, this technical, complex thing. I don't care how it works. I couldn't care less, right? Its value depends on complexity. If the complexity weren't there, it wouldn't work. I wouldn't have the experience that I love, but I don't care about the complexity. Not about this thing, because I'm not a watchmaker. So I couldn't care less. Okay? So how do we overcome the fetish of complexity? I have 3 general rules here. Rule number 1 is keep it under the hood. What do I mean by that? What I mean is, if you don't have to use complex ideas, if you don't have to use technical terminology, if you don't have to start talking about algorithms and cryptography and all this wonderful stuff that kind of turns you on intellectually, don't do it. Keep it for meetups like this. That's fine. Nerd out with your friends, nerd out with your colleagues, nerd out when it's appropriate. But when it comes to reaching new audiences, it's usually not appropriate. It's usually not. Second thing, use relatable themes. What does that mean? That means use concepts and ideas that are universal, that everybody can understand. So to give you an example, not everybody understands what cryptographic means. Everybody understands this is private, right? Not everybody understands decentralized finance, but everyone understands fuck the banks. Focus on benefits, not technical features. So in other words, what do the technical features of your product or service mean? What is the tangible benefit? Okay? So for example, in the case of my watch, the tangible benefit of all of its complex features is that I can track my workouts, I can get fitter because of the reports it generates me, the suggestions that it makes about how I can train more effectively, monitors my sleep. These are all benefits. These are all tangible things that I appreciate. They derive from its complex features, but they're not about the complexity itself. Okay? Okay, so let's look at a practical case study. And it relates to women's health. Now, for many, many years, for hundreds of years really, women have been neglected when it comes to medical studies, medical data, medicine generally. For hundreds of years, women have either not been included in medical studies or treated basically like slightly smaller men. And this has had some really serious consequences. It means that medical trials have been done on men rather than women, meaning that medicines, the dosages are suitable for men rather than for women. The fact that men and women have different hormonal cycles hasn't been taken into account. And of course, there are some diseases which affect women more than men, or indeed, which affect only women. So this is a big problem. And there is a Web3 startup that is trying to solve this problem. They're called Asterisk DAO. And basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to create a decentralized platform using a bunch of Web3 technologies that allows women to independently report their symptoms of various diseases and independently report how they are affected by different types of medicine. Now, to make all of this stuff work depends on Web3 technologies. But if you look at this screenshot from their website, what do you notice?
No Web3 mentioned.
There's absolutely no mention of Web3 at all. Instead, they mention things like 2/3 of Alzheimer's patients are women, 72% of chronic pain patients are women, 2 times more women suffer from poor quality sleep, only 27% of participants in heart disease studies are women, and 8% of sports medicine research is conducted exclusively on women. So this startup perfectly embodies the 3 principles that I talked about a moment ago. So the first principle, keep it under the hood. The second principle, focus on relatable themes. And the third principle, can anyone remember what that was? Focus on benefits, yes, very good. We're building the first of its kind female-specific platforms to help researchers understand the disorders that affect us most, okay? So it perfectly embodies the 3 principles. Let me wrap things up with a quote from Veronica Kirin, the founder of Asterisk. We have to make it stupid simple for people to be involved. We don't need to say it's Web3. Brave browser, for example, is a Web3 browser, but it doesn't say it's a Web3 browser. It just says your privacy is more protected here, so use us instead of Google Chrome. Brilliant. Perfect. So, to wrap up, what are the 3 rules? Number 1, keep it under the hood. Very good. Number 2, use relatable themes. Very good. And number 3, focus on benefits. Thank you very, very much.